Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 18 of Series 7. The question for today is, do cognitive frameworks provide more structural than logical support of value states? The reading for today, for those who want it, is from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 7, Section 8. So in these workshops, I'm advocating the resolution of certain problems of life and consciousness in terms of value. That is, a principle of affirmation or will to value leading to a certain adequacy or sufficiency of value. But the idea of adequacy or sufficiency of value misleadingly implies a maximization or quantification of value. I have previously redressed this misconception of a sufficiency of value with numerous qualifications. These are qualifications such as the quality of value that incorporates properties like absence and truth. And a key feature of these qualifications is their particular relations between value and cognition, which is the topic of the day. Cognition consists of states like reason, perception, belief and knowledge. And cognition can be defined more exactly as intentionality towards objects that constitute cognition. But non-cognitive states are constituted by experience, not by any intentional object. Yet both cognitive and non-cognitive states arguably have interiority, either as intentionality or in themselves. And this interiority involves relations with its objects. So the aim of this workshop is to explain the difference and significance of these two kinds of cognitive relation. One kind of cognitive relation are the logical relations typically employed in analytic philosophy. Another kind of cognitive relation is illustrated in the immediacy of perception or intuition. For the sake of clarity, I can also call these two kinds of cognitive relation phenomenological and analytic. Logical or analytic relations are easy to explain as those employed in ordinary reasoning processes. For example, in the process of logical reasoning employed to attain some goal or objective. Phenomenological relations between mental states and cognitive states are of a different kind, and as their description implies, phenomenological relations are prominent in phenomenology. Yet they are also common in many, or even most, experiences in life. That is, when we apprehend things in the world without reasoning about them. We also find particular examples in the phenomenological notion of intentionality and of course in phenomenology. Husserl, for instance, spoke of relations with a life world. Sartre was similarly interested in pre-reflective perception. Religious belief is another example of the pre-reflective significance of cognition. I will expand on these examples shortly. The significance of phenomenological relations for us is expressed in at least two ways. One, in the supportive function that cognition affords mental states. I will again explain this later. Two, that different kinds of qualities of value states are produced and depend upon cognitive frameworks. I can reiterate that the hypothetical ideal value state is a certain adequacy or sufficiency of value, and that particular cognitive objects like truth, God, or even absence affect their quality of value. This kind of relation is graphically illustrated with a metaphor from Georges Bataille. That is, Bataille likens the mind to water in a bottle. For us, the water is liquid in a container, illustrating the relation between mental states and objects. And again, mental states are value states, and their external objects are cognitive objects. This description of the relation between value states and their external objects has several implications. One, it implies structure, and the particular structure of intentionality towards external cognitive objects. Two, and there is also an implication of the variable dependency of these value states. That is, the values, value states, or mental states will have varying degrees of independence or substantiality. The liquid can represent mental states of different viscosities, independence, or substantiality. The thicker the liquid or mental state, the more independent it is of external frameworks. In the language of the metaphor, for example, water will flow all over the place without external support, and thick grease or mud won't need much of an external support. I previously explained what I mean by the sufficiency or insubstantiality of value and consciousness, and I will briefly do so again with reference to Sartre's ontology. Yet greater sufficiency of value will include states like self-esteem, maturity, and ethical fortitude. The above metaphor of mind as liquid in a container is of course a structural account, and such a structural account can be further conceptualized with an externalist theory of mind. An externalist theory emphasizes the importance of the external world in explanations of mind. That is, experience of the world, its objects, and our cognition of them are crucial to conscious existence. For instance, minds without external diversity, or brains in a vat, could not be conscious. And this claim is supported by the widely held view that consciousness is conscious of something. This is also a criticism of the idea of the brain as the sole or overriding precondition of consciousness. Sean Gallagher and Ron Harry cite a neurological fallacy of overemphasizing the role of the brain, and Alverno presents an externalist view of mind as a relation between a neurological center and the external world. Also, in Max Wellman's account, consciousness similarly results from a relation with the world. The point is that externalism emphasizes the importance of cognitive perception of the world, and externalism shows that the perception of objects have causal, not just logical significance. That is, the perception of external objects is an essential aspect of producing mind or consciousness, and we can describe this relation as causal, not just logical. But for us, and out of deference for Humean skepticism, this relation can't always be described as causal. We might then describe it as an affective relation between value states and cognitive states. This term has useful connotations from the two meanings of the word affect. These are as a verb, to influence or impact, and as a noun denoting feeling or emotion. Both of these have a place in the kind of relation in question. The relation in question is defined more explicitly by phenomenologists like Husserl, Heidegger and Sartre. Both analytic philosophers and phenomenologists are interested in cognition as intentional objects, but in their logical or structural significance respectively. And one example of this kind of cognition is perception. In this respect, Husserl speaks of the noted life world in which perceptions take on a more active role. That is, in perceiving a building, for instance, we only see the front but understand that there is also a back. Husserl also talks about different modes of perception, or presentations as he calls them. That is, presentations can appear in the flesh, in desiring or fearing, in bodily presence, in memory or in fantasy. These are different modes or qualities that indicate a different kind of relation than that of the analytic. And Husserl also believes in graduated perceptions with greater or lesser degrees of the sensory in them. This again contrasts with a binary analytic judgment of objects as either existing or not existing. Yet such a graduation is compatible with the idea of attenuated cognition previously discussed. Heidegger's notion of Dasein as being in the world also implies an intimate relation with the world. With Heidegger, mind is no longer separated from the world, as in the Cartesian view. And in Heidegger's existential account, objects in the world are crucial to his analysis. Objects like a hammer, for example, are described as ready to hand or perceived in different ways. Sartre followed this thinking in his interest in pre-reflective perception or pre-rational thought. That is, our conscious perceptions are primary experiences that are uniquely our own. Other thinkers like Gallagher, Metzinger and Zahavi similarly share this view. And Kant unexpectedly poses a manifold of preconceptualized perceptions. Sartre's ontology of two forms of being or existence provides another way of illustrating this relation. For Sartre, conscious or subjective being for itself is a kind of nothingness, a lack or desire for being. Physical being in itself is as a plenitude or permanence that has independent existence. So for Sartre, an insubstantial consciousness is seeking the substantiality of physicality. But this is impossible, so for Sartre, mankind is a useless passion. Yet the illustration I want to make comes from a disagreement with Sartre's account. That is, Sartre presupposes an uncontroversial immediate relation of the conscious for itself with the in itself. But consciousness need not presuppose that the in itself has the properties that Sartre says it has. Consciousness can thereby seek a more realistic substantiality in a sufficiency of value. In my analysis, I've added the simplistic step of regarding physicality as a conception of physicality. This also turns Sartre's relation between being in itself and conscious being for itself into a phenomenological relation between cognition as appearance and value or value states. These are philosophical examples of pre-reflective modes of cognition that also imply interior states. There are many other examples that also apply to life experiences that we will discuss another day. These include moral intuitions, self-consciousness, and experiences of mysteriousness. Yet religion is a paradigm example of a cognitive framework that supports crucial values and value states. Religion affords both a complex cognitive framework and the kind of value states central to our inquiry. With respect to value, God is the believer's highest value, revealing the nature of that value or values. These are the divine characteristics of omniscience, omnipotence, and absolute beneficence. And these are expressions of sufficiency as well as human aspirations. Theologians endorse this view by defining God as a necessary and self-sufficient being. God thereby represents both self-sufficiency and the highest conceivable values at the time. Combining both these ideas of sufficiency and value, God becomes a metaphor for value sufficiency. And value sufficiency is, of course, the principle that I'm advocating that we should live by. In another interpretation, Feuerbach held Christianity as the highest form of religious development. This is because it was closest to recognizing the underlying object of human veneration, mankind himself. As a cognitive framework, religion reaches into and expresses practically every aspect of life, and religious belief sustains spiritual experiences primarily through faith, not reason. This emphasis of faith or belief over reason has been a long-standing religious teaching. This faith-based account competes with rationalist view of religion that focuses on its truth or falsity. This is the view of the four horsemen of the new atheism of Dennett, Dawkins, Hitchens and Sam Harris. But Rabbi Julia Neuberger and others argue that religion is more about action, fellowship, ethics and ritual. And others like David Strauss, Bultmann and John Hick advance mythological interpretations of religion. These are examples of religion as embracing an affective or phenomenological, not logical, version of cognition. And again, religion is a paradigm example of a cognitive framework though driven by non-cognitive motives. The idea of God, together with a panoply of doctrines, supports a system of meaning, purpose and value. Many religious examples of the importance of cognition can be found in scriptures, such as in John's Gospel 20:31, where it's written, "These things are written so that you will believe, and that believing you will have life in his name." So religion not only illustrates an affective or phenomenological version of cognition, which further serves as a supporting cognitive framework for value states, but also illustrates the nature of the value states as a certain sufficiency expressed in the idea of God. There are many other illustrations of this supportive function of cognition, in addition to its logical functions. In fact, they are so ubiquitous in life that the problem is one of selection rather than of discovery. Yet they are frequently overlooked in the shadow of a dogmatic rationalism. One example of this supportive function is a child playing with a toy transported to other states of mind. Or for adults, it could be a new car or a suit of clothes. The point here is how the idea of something special produces a magical or special state of mind. Another difference between phenomenological and analytic relations is about both function and objective. As noted earlier, an analytic view is attempting to make deductions in order to draw conclusions. A phenomenological view seeks to understand this relation and its consequences. This can be seen in the kind of relation as immediate perception employed in aesthetic appreciation. That is, the intuitive appreciation of art. Music or paintings doesn't employ logical processes, yet it has a powerful aesthetic effects. For example, Nietzsche said, "Life without music would be a mistake." John McDowell further discusses the dependence of aesthetic value on the cognition of external objects. Nietzsche goes on to reject religious, moral or rationalist justifications, and he sought aesthetic justification. He wrote, "The existence of the world is justified only as an aesthetic phenomenon." For Nietzsche, aesthetics is about visceral experience, including sensual and sexual experience. He decried ethics, but he sought to replace it with a new morality and new values. Yet immediate or intuitive perception is widely and unavoidably employed in ethics for better or worse. Last week we saw how intuition can mislead beliefs about fundamental, intrinsic and objective values. This is because such fundamental principles are difficult to establish. They include such fundamental intuitions as why is the goodwill good? John McDowell tried to explain such basic perceptual capacity in terms of a favourable light. Kant also presents an interesting account in attempting to integrate both subjective and objective concerns. Kant held a rationalist or analytic view of cognition, but also moves towards an intuitive view of cognition. That is, he asks us to work out the material content of action through reason and universalization. But Kant and other cognitivists held that a certain conception of things is sufficient to motivate an action. For example, just seeing someone in need of help will motivate us to help him without any additional impulse. Or just seeing an apple will motivate us to eat it without a feeling of hunger. Non-cognitivists like Hume hold that reason is impotent without feeling to motivate action. Hume also held views about cognition that are compatible with those advanced here. That is, he explained belief, action and experience with his principle of an association of ideas, not reason. On this view, beliefs in causality and moral principles are derived from impressions and sentiment. And in this way, Hume connects values with an immediate form of cognition as impressions. But it's not my purpose to argue these views here, only to illustrate them. Moral judgments, however, provide cogent examples of how intuitive beliefs support crucial values. My own account of morality illustrates this relation particularly succinctly as might be expected. This is a value theory and ethics in which value judgments reflect value back upon the agent. And in my view, that reflected value explains the moral experience. More specifically, I hold that morality involves judgments about matters that are deemed to be moral. They are only deemed to be moral because I believe that their content isn't fixed or definitive. Yet that conception of them as moral employs the relation at issue and in this workshop. That is, the relation of a perceptual cognition to a value state, which in this case is to moral value. Yet one of the most crucial issues in all theories of ethics and in life is relations with other people. And one of the most potent cognitive frameworks in supporting value states, like self-esteem, is other people. This is especially the case of social structures which objectify and internalize the value of other people. Our continual involvement and need of other people reinforces their significance and value. Social endorsement is one of the most potent forms of cognition as qualification by other people. Hence the power of fame, shame, social esteem, status, ostracization, face and stigma. The point is that our conception of other people is immediate and visceral, bypassing logical processes, and that this conception of others deeply supports our states of self-value. Such examples of ethics and relations with others illustrate the relation at issue between cognition and value states. But the scope and breadth of these relations are the topic for next week that I don't want to preempt today. Yet in the interest of defining this relation, I will outline another advantage of this mode of cognition. I previously noted that the cognitive non-cognitive distinction isn't clear-cut, and cognition functions in diverse ways. In this present discussion, cognition functions phenomenologically as a supportive structure, but as a general capacity, it can also function as an organizing principle. This was seen earlier in regarding physicality as a conception of physicality. This means that a conception of things can bring together disparate objects as different modes of conception. For example, take the two disparate concepts of the value of truth and the value of other people. A phenomenological view of cognition can relate these two disparate concepts in the following way. Truth as a property of particular mode of cognition, and we have a conception of other people that can be qualified as them having intrinsic value. Therefore, both truth and other people can be related as different modes of cognition. This view exploits the requirement that all considered human activities entail conceptions of things, and that these conceptions of things can be assessed or valued as different modes of cognition. And of primary interest here is a phenomenological, perceptual or affective mode of cognition, and its supportive function is in relation to values and value states. But criticisms of the above account can come from at least two sources. One is from hardline analytic or positivistic accounts. These would discount the significance of immediate, associative and affective cognition. In response, I would offer further arguments along the lines above. Another source of criticism is from postmodernists who reject structures of consciousness implied in the above view. Yet postmodernists have physicalist inclinations which neglect consciousness, which is one of their reasons for rejecting structures of consciousness. And they reject normative principles in principle which the above account offers. In conclusion, we should reiterate the two modes of cognition at issue and their relation to value states. I wanted to differentiate an immediate phenomenological or perceptual form of cognition from the common form of cognition as logic or reason, even though immediate or affective cognition is probably more common than reason. I began this presentation by illustrating phenomenological cognition with the metaphor of fluid in a container, and we saw that this view had affinities with an externalist theory of mind, and that this view implied both structure and a dependency of mental states on that structure. This was also an opportunity to present the notion of a certain sufficiency of value. We saw many examples of supporting cognitive frameworks such as religious belief and social structures. These included accounts of ethics and the significance of cognitive support to such states as self-esteem. Yet the proliferation of examples was beginning to extend beyond this week's brief of definition and description. Next week, we will look at the breadth and scope of the relation of this mode of cognition with value states. The week after next, we will be asking about the wider significance of cognitive support. So let me have your criticisms and comments at the meeting or on websites like Zoom or meetup.com.